this computer. Okay, here we go. Right.
So I think we should just go around and give us your name, pronouns, what the word nest or environmentalist means to you. Some of us remember. That's more going to work.
My name is Frederick. And the word nest or environmentalist is a complete
Is it complete what?
mystery.
Mystery. Okay. All right.
Hello, Mel. How are you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Pam. Sometimes I go by Toby, that's my artistic name. And that's environmentalist. Well, yeah, it's, I like to live
It's the
with
center of a block. It
people
says
who
comments
understand
outside.
how serious the situation is and what talk people into like whatever.
And
Composting or.
you might have to speak a little louder.
Okay, so yeah, that's for environmentalists. I just wanna, it seems like it's going to be a community for people who are on the same page about how bad the situation is with the climate, the environment, and our lives. So that's what my perception of this is.
I'm Matt. I'm this nest for environmentalists. You know, it conjures up images of high places like trees. And I think it's also a safe haven for people of like breed.
Right. I'm Tanya, and she, her. Nest for environmentalists, it sounds like a home to me, a nest. Environmentalists sound people in common with nature, the land, connecting with the land, connecting with our responsibilities of the land and nature and everything that is on this planet.
Greg, I go by he and him. Yeah, to me, it's about nurturing, right? That's where it's nurturing. So the idea is to nurture, be more engaged, passion around the environment.
So my name's Howard. I was invited by Greg to talk about new land trusts and new explorations in science and technology plus math. So Nest is the name of a middle school in my neighborhood,
What?
and they added math. So it's Nest plus M. So I just wanted to
I think that too.
irrelevant.
Why not?
Hi, I'm Scott, and I'm here today to support the efforts that Greg has turned us all onto. And I think of Nest. I think about Nest.
Hello.
We have a bird's nest on our friend's property that swallows come in, or at least smaller birds, terms use annually. So it's the kind of thing where it can be reused and rebuilt. And it's a place for growth. It's a place for education. It's a place for nurturing and love. So the ability to broadcast that and to send that out in whatever way we can in this electronic world of ours is, I think, a worthwhile, undertaking. So.
Gail, she, her. I don't think I can add to anything anyone said, so I'll say it with mine. I think of Greg Todd.
What?
I think of Greg Todd. What do you think of?
Oh, you think of a nest. We think of Greg when you think of a nest. Okay.
No, I think of
Oh, the project.
the project.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think of him because that's
Nice. And everyone on, we'd love to hear your Renato and Dawn, you could introduce yourselves and say what Nest for Environmentalists may sound like to you.
This is Don. I'm from Michigan, and I've probably known Greg longer than anybody else in the room. We were in high school together, and I've followed his development, his thinking in your city, and I occasionally visit him. And about 4 years ago, he took me to a very highly efficient construction site that was being developed, and he was very impressed with that. And that's a follow-up. Today's a follow-up to what we saw at that time. So I'm here to learn. I'm here to support Greg and see where this is going to take everybody there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Renato?
Hello, I'm Renato. I'm from Brazil. I'm in Brazil right now, but I live in New York since 2018. And about it was 2020, I met Greg, and we got connected with all this activism and environmentalism and different ways of building community. When we met, it was a workshop on dragon dreaming, which is a method for designing projects that are very successful, but also that are very worthwhile, right? In the sense that you have to go deeper inside what matters, and what the earth is calling you to do, and also very genuine with others in terms of finding a win-win. What else about me? Before I worked as a management consultant, then I became a social entrepreneur. I started a nonprofit in Brazil, and now I work at a nonprofit in New York called Idealist. And when I think about the Nest for Environmentalists, I think about eggs. I think about eggs that are, there in the nest, and I wonder what will be born out of these eggs, right? And what the earth and what we need to create for the future generations and for ourselves. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All righty, so I just remembered another gentleman, I think you would know him, Aaron Solomon, brother from Philly.
Find a way to fit him in here. Get a little pack.
Coming with a friend, and she was coming 5 times.
All right, well, they can fit over there.
Our caterer apparently had the wrong address, so she's
I'm telling you, everybody's getting the
it's
same
some kind
thing.
of, I don't know, what is it? Mercury retrograde or whatever.
Some vibe.
There is something about Scorpio. A friend of mine was really into
There's some
astrology.
confusion.
Yeah, there's
Last
always
night.
some house somewhere is retrograde.
Well,
Scorpio.
this one got us all in.
So
We
we're
all
here, thank God, anyway.
we all made it. Yeah.
Early Scorpions.
Hey, it's your time.
And you're a Scorpio, I'm a Scorpio.
Really? I thought you were a Sagittarius.
15th.
Really?
Coming on.
You coming? You already know over? You have your birthday?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Today was Guy Fawkes Day. Anybody celebrate Guy Fawkes Day?
Guy Fawkes.
No.
I think it's a British
What's
thing.
that?
That's the guy that tried to blow up the Queen. The Queen, yeah.
The queen?
A few hundred
Queen
years
of
ago.
Tried to blow her up.
She's
Yeah,
still
those
alive
guys had a
though.
plot.
No, not this queen, another one.
Well, this one lasted.
These guys had
Like-
a gunpowder plot, and I think they were going to blow up the Parliament. And
How can you guys
they
hear
had
pretty
spies
good
that
or
day,
no?
And they got caught,
Renato?
and you know what happened? They
Yeah.
got found.
Let me bring it closer then, a little bit.
Yes,
Feel like
more or less.
more important than the video.
Celebrate all of the
So
commemorations.
I have to, just to get the audio in, because they can't hear as well. So looks like, is there somebody else in the participants? Oh, no, that's me. Okay. Greg, did you want to continue? Maybe introduce.
Well, let's see, how do we decide? This is the second as a board here, parties, and I think the people present, Ann and Frederick are the first one, right? Tanya was present, which we had at the house. And what you'll be pleased to know is the contractors left yesterday, and they have the house fully wrapped. House wrapped, and all the windows are in, roof's done, it's all sealed up and ready for winter. I was up there today, and it must have been 65. It's crazy, because the heat rises, and it's got, yeah, and it's got 8 inches of insulation in the wood, so the heat just goes up and there's nowhere to go, so it just gets out. So anyways, the house itself is in the middle of the Amani Gardens, which I know.
You want to bring a visual of that, or no, you're fine.
We could.
It's on the website, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna share the screen, okay, so everyone can see. I'm gonna go off for a second. You can continue while I do this.
And Scotty's been there, right?
On the outside.
On the outside. It wasn't a few years ago before there was much of a house.
Yeah.
So we had a climactic end. They had this giant man lift. Can reach like 100 feet. Elevated platform. So they were using it to reach the back of the house, but they were using a vacant lot to get in, and
it's
with all the
called-
rain, it like swung. It's a giant thing with huge wheels, smashing and bashing around. And managed to smash in the fence of the adjacent.
What is it called? Waste, what's the website name? You can go ahead.
Wanna say
Yeah,
back up
thank
a
you.
Sorry for
It's
the
okay.
mix up and delay.
little?
What is it? Waste,
Waste not, Greg. No, waste not permaculture is the website. Sorry.
permaculture. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna take. Sure. So it might be a little slow, waste.
While we're setting up, I've got some beer in the back. Just supposed to be a party.
Waste not, okay, so here we are. And I'm gonna go to the co-living project. And I'm bringing it up now. Here we go. Here, up here for a second. And I think he has some pictures he wants to share there. So this is one photo. I don't know if you can see. Maybe show a better photo here. You want to
Dim the lights.
let me, yeah, dim the lights might be better. Renato, you could see very good, and Don, you could see?
See,
Okay, all right. So here's, hopefully maybe we could bring this photo bigger. Here we go.
There's our giant man lift here. It's called a man lift. That's the technical term.
Personally.
But, yeah, that's how,
I always thought of those as cherry pickers.
it's a cherry picker. But it's a more elaborate version, I guess, or a bigger version. But they had that over in a vacant lot.
As you see here,
Where's that picture taken?
That was about
Look at
3
that.
weeks ago, maybe.
look at that guy up there. Putting up
That's
the,
Mike. Mike and his brother Ralph.
So the people are the contractors. Where are the contractors?
Yeah, they left.
What is the name?
They were what?
What What's their name?
Ralph and Mike.
Oh, they don't have a company name.
They work for Nicolosi Brothers.
Oh.
They're the general contractor.
Here he is again in that.
There he is up there in his little nest. Yes.
And here's the other part of the garden. I think this is
So
the
we good?
corner
1 second.
side.
Mel, do you want to stay?
Actually, can't, if I do come back, maybe I'll check you, because every other coming on, except the other guys coming on a little bit later, right?
Oh.
Yeah, I have to go clean up this one.
All right.
It's been a great day. Hello, everyone. My name is
Hello.
Mel. Enjoy your presentation. I'm gonna leave some cards here, and if I do pop back in, I will text you.
All right.
If you're still going.
Yes,
Enjoy.
Mel's close to the
Nice.
garden, right?
Yes,
And the
you guys are
project.
awesome. I love the
Yes,
garden.
yeah.
Be sure to leave that fire cone.
Gotcha. And I'm gonna just-
Thank
I'll take a
you.
beer later.
Huh?
I'll take a beer.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, they're
What do you like? There's
You got good taste.
Pilsner and IPA.
Sorry, guys, unless you guys want to get your own beers on Zoom and to join along, you're not here.
That's one of my favorites.
Or get something to drink.
Do you have something besides the IPA?
Oh, we have Pilsner.
Yeah, a
Okay,
couple, like
that's
a couple of years ago.
Anyone
Okay, all
else?
right.
The first
Okay.
of these gatherings, about a month ago.
Was it at the?
Yeah. I mean,
I actually thought we were gonna be there tonight.
Yeah, and it's a little, like I said, it's
It's
remarkably warm, but
it was remarkably close.
yeah, actually, it's gotten warmer. And they've got all the wrapped in now. There's no, then when you were there, we had big gaping holes.
Yeah, it was.
Now it's fully, this side now is fully covered, as is
All
the
the
rear.
windows. Okay, you want to see more photos? I can
As you
continue.
can see the garden in the foreground.
This is the garden.
Monty two.
Is that part of the land?
Yeah, well, I don't own it. It's actually, the garden is, this piece is owned by the city of New York.
Oh, really?
Is
And
that a
it's-
community garden?
Yeah, it's a community garden called Monty two. The south side is the Monty one.
So on the other side of this building that,
So the city owns the land?
Yeah, it's a community garden. It's like 500.
Yeah,
So-
but I didn't know the city owned them.
But, so wait, so if they wanted, they could demolish the building? if they felt
No,
like-
no, I own that land. This is the garden.
Oh,
Are there laws in place in the city to preserve community gardens?
Yeah, the way it works, to my knowledge, is that it's transferred to the Parks Department.
Okay.
And for it to be taken, there is their overhead. Garden.
Today.
You've got the greenhouse, and that thing next to the greenhouse is a solar heating. It uses the sun to heat water, which then heats.
Can
Top side.
you do the thing around?
I'm
So
sorry.
we see what you're talking about?
what do you, what-
Can you
Pointer?
put the cursor where you're talking?
oh, okay, here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
So that, see, can you put it on the solar array, that thing? That's, I think, around 30 evacuated tubes. And, they're like, it's a double tube. And the inner tube is filled with water, then there's a vacuum, and then there's an outer tube. And the way it works is the sun comes up, heats the water in the inner tube, and then the vacuum prevents it from escaping heat.
Where are you talking about?
The cursor, see this thing?
Yes.
That's the evacuated tubes.
Yeah, and you're part of the garden. You're supposed to
Oh,
know
I
these
didn't
things.
know that that's- okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason for heating the water is what?
What?
When you're heating the water, what are you doing?
Well, it gets pumped in 3 50-gallon barrels inside the greenhouse.
Okay.
Yep,
keep it
inside,
hot.
to keep this
Okay.
inside
And then
warm.
we're now
So we
working
have all
on,
kinds of like seedlings that are already
Just to
growing
keep the
for
temperature.
fall
temperature
and winter
reason for most of the
seasonal
heating, the
vegetables,
temperature.
right?
Yeah,
To keep it
slowly
year
get
round
the
rather
green.
than it be, as you see, these parts are closed down.
Mm.
So because it's just not warm anymore, but inside we have something going. And as you see here in this little, that little white, hut kind of tent, we put those plants inside of here. And that warmth still is enough to keep those winter vegetables growing. So
So
it can
when
grow.
did you take that picture?
Yeah, that's an old picture.
This was taken about a year
Yeah, because I
this
was
is
there
their
today and
house?
there's plenty.
ago. No,
No,
we're-
no.
the picture's taken from the house. This
Yeah.
is the roof
the
deck.
house is off.
This is taken from
Right.
the roof of the house, of the nest.
Okay.
So we're now looking
It's
north.
not in the house. I'm looking at it.
Right, but this is essentially how
Yeah.
it looks during the
Yeah,
winter
that's-
times, right?
That's
So,
how it keeps
Oh, This is,
the
yeah, this was taken in the autumn right after.
so
we put
next
in
month it'll
about
start looking like this.
15 cubic yards of wood chips. That's why it has that nice brown.
So here is some interior shots. Which one do you want to show? Maybe,
Well, show the one with glass there in the upper left. Starting.
well, you know, even this one is better. This one here, this one.
Oh, these are renderings.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's a rendering.
Oh.
That's the actual
Okay, sorry.
house. That was just taken a few days ago. So at this point, we've now got, today, and like yesterday, they finished up. You can see there's some daylight coming in. That's all been closed off now, sheeting. So that's, the ceiling is 16 feet.
So you're sealing the house until when, spring?
Well, until we get some more money,
Oh.
which I'll tell you about. But in any case, that's, these windows are all triple glazed, i.e. 3 panes of glass. And the ceiling height is 16 feet.
That's the
So I just,
hallway, and that's the entryway.
no, that's the entire first floor. 16 feet. It's 20 feet by 38. So just showing someone yesterday, you know, you walk in and look up, it's like a being in a church or something. It's got this crazy high ceiling. But right where that picture was taken, was going to be a sleeping hall, 8 feet in the air. That will look out over, and this will be the living dining area. If you want to flip to it, there's a rendering.
Okay, let's go to the rendering, because you're right. That
It
gives you a
kinda
better
shows you
idea.
where
Tell me which one it is, so that we,
there's one facing back. Go
Which-
up there to the left.
this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a view of that same that shot that we just took. It's basically this. Obviously,
Very nice render.
So that's the.
Yeah. So this will be the living area here. And I think we may change, might be the dining area there.
Right, so the kitchen will be here, right?
Now the kitchen is where it's supposed to.
Oh, here.
That's the kitchen. And then the stairs coming down on your right are from the sleeping room. So there'll be a railing looking out over the space.
Why did you choose to have such high ceilings?
Well, for a couple of reasons. A, I think it's going to be a very dramatic space to be in. I've done real estate for like 30 years. And I know that when you create high ceilings, it gives you a sense of like comfort. I think it's a psychological feeling. It's why they make cathedrals so tall. Right? That's he knows all about it. So I mean, you know, the feeling you get kind of in your gut, to me, when I walk in a big space like that, I feel expansive. I feel like a connection with the spiritual, you know. So for me, having a nice space like that, it's just going to make people feel like I want to be. And having this light wall, you know, it's just going to add to that. Looking out into nature.
And also it's tall because here these stairs go to a mezzanine floor, which is kind of halfway kind of in the air.
Yeah.
So part of it is very high in this area
Yeah.
for that experience, but then there's also a space in between.
Yeah, there'll be a sleeping loft that's about 10
Right
feet
here.
deep. That'll be, sleeping. Then to the front, there's another row of space that'll be only about 10 feet. Well, to be determined. And there's a view looking towards the loft.
Is this one? You
Yeah,
want to, okay. So
So
like,
this is looking back towards the sleeping room. And you can see the kitchen. This rendering, they put in a small office area space. But, it all depends on how.
it would be nice if this was also like a guest room. Or,
I mean, it's
yeah.
about, I mean, we can play around with it. It could be like 10 to 12, maybe even 15. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's the basic setup.
So Greg, you designed the place and so the architects what you wanted. You know, this is your design.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've been doing real estate a long time. And I always really appreciate, you know, high ceilings. Said for the reasons said, so I felt like if I was going to build something like that, I really wanted high ceiling on the first floor. And then the upper two floors, this is the top floor, third floor, looking back. And how we intend to do this is something that we can talk about in our meeting. But there are 2 floors above first floor, and each one is identical in the sense that they're both 20 by 36. Second floor has a sliding glass door on a narrow balcony terrace. It's about 2 feet deep.
Let's give a picture of that. Do you have a picture of that? No?
I don't really, because it wasn't finished.
Okay.
There is a sliding glass door. This is a view from the front, looking towards the front. You can see those little, there's 12 of these, I believe, little windows, like portholes. That kind of give it a signature look on the outside. And this area become like a closet or a study alcove or something.
And you talked about it being passive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right, because passive house is a protocol stolen from the US by the sneaky Germans. It was actually the first passive houses were built in Champaign, Urbana by some brilliant professors there who thought, gee, what if we seal up a house really tight and super insulated? Wouldn't it be really a great way to have energy efficient? So they did it and it worked, except they tend to get moldy a lot because the air was sealed for chair. And at the point, this was back in the 70s. Remember the energy crisis, farms, no gas and all that. So they were like, wow, this is a big deal. Well, then remember Reagan, right? Ripped out the solar panels. Oh my God. Energy is not a problem. The whole problem of energy was fixed.
They somehow overcame that problem of stale air.
Well,
Air was overcome
by the Germans.
heat exchange.
The Germans, some physicists in Darmstadt, Germany, got together and they're like, you know, those Americans are onto something. Let me see if we can make it work. So they started tweaking it around. And they came up with these algorithms to basically define passive house. And the air problem was resolved by something called energy recovery ventilation, which is really cool. It's basically, once you seal the house, they basically have one point air to enter the building. And the air is pumped out and pushed in through the same mixing chamber. It's basically semi-permeable membrane baffle. So the cold air and the warm air going out rubs up against the cold air or hot air coming in. And then exchanges the heat across this membrane, this baffle, so that the air coming in is preheated or pre-cooled. And also the humidity is equalized across the air. So in the summer, when the outside air is really super humid, the air inside is much less humid, so the humidity is equalized across the membrane. And then every room in the house has a port. And the port, in the case of the kitchens and the bathrooms, is basically pulling stale air out of the kitchens and baths and running it outdoors. And then the fresh air coming in is pumped in the living room and bedroom. So it is a very small, very low powered fan. It's not like an air conditioner with blasting air. Because the house is super sealed, you don't lose air. So you're just pumping a little small pump of air. It's enough to continually turn the air. It's also run through a filter. So it filters out the pollen. So it's super healthy. And also 80 to 90% more efficient than typical building because the capture is there. So the Germans came up with this protocol for passive house. It basically measures two things. It measures air turns per hour. You get that number, they basically put a fan in the front door of the house and blow the house up like a balloon. And then they have a countdown clock, how quickly the air dissipates. And from that number, they can calculate air turns. And the German protocol for passive houses, you can't have more than 0.5 air turns per hour. So basically air would turn over every 2 hours. Super sealed. Now the city building code now, I think they've tightened it up. They have to have fewer than 2 air turns. So that gives you a flavor. And the other protocol is the number of BTUs per square foot. So that's a major accomplishment.
So in the summer.
So heating is a totally separate system. Heating and cooling is totally separate. So in this house, most houses, you're going to have heat pumps that will basically what they call mini splits, which is you've probably seen them in new buildings. They have a blower up on the ceiling that's remotely controlled, and that will provide you heating and cooling. But there'll be like very, very small heat pumps because the energy efficiency. So you'll save money not only in the heating bills and the cooling bills, very, very small, but the heat pumps will be very small. You don't need much. Some houses they talk about you heat the whole house with a candle in the basement. So we're talking. So
I'm gonna stop sharing here if you don't mind,
Right.
and allow, I guess, Howard to start maybe talking.
all right.
And Howard, I'm gonna put you on this screen here so that you can speak to them directly since we can see you here, but they maybe cannot. I don't know why Dawn's is the main one, but yeah, add to unmute. Yeah, let me just add to unmute here. Oh, add to unmute, no, add to unmute, no, okay. So let me just make this one the main one. Oh, why am I having problems here?
So I'm just wondering, guys, I'm just thinking, is this food getting cold,
Yes.
Tanya? Do we-
No, it's not yet.
Not
Well,
yet cold?
yeah, let's just wait a little bit, just so that the folks don't get tired. But spotlight for everyone. Hi, Excel. There we go. I wanted to get you
Okay,
on the.
So Greg invited me to talk about community land trust, and as I understand it, you want to put that building or consider putting that building into a community land trust. So I was involved in organizing the first land trust in the city, Rainier Community Land Trust, for rehab and action back in the 1980s, and what we were doing was taking over vacant, abandoned city-owned buildings that had been burned or simply where the residents had been displaced by the private landlords who no longer made a profit on renting these structures in a historically low-income neighborhood. First German and Irish, then the Jewish population in the 1800s, late 1800s, and then 1940s and 50s. People from Puerto Rico began moving into the area. So since the 1960s, that area where I am, the Lower East Side, which is sort of Spanglish for Lower East Side, has been largely, it was plurality Puerto Rican, and it's an area that's very diverse now because of the influx of other folks in gentrification. But since the 50s, it's had a high amount of public housing units. And this also extends to the area south, where the neighborhood I'm calling Lower East Side is like Avenue A to D.
Yeah.
East River House on 14th Street. But the Lower East Side south of Houston Street is very similar historical dynamics. So when I grew up in Washington Heights and watched the city burn down. You know. So I was interested in being part of this housing movement that I had heard about, and came down to the Lower East Side and began working with an organization called Adoptability. They were doing a homesteading multifamily program when Jimmy Carter was president. So I signed on and was part of a building, 16-unit building, was being renovated into 16 units. And we were organized into Housing Development Fund Corporations, or HDFCs, which are generally speaking these low-income co-ops that are created from these buildings that the city foreclosed on for tax arrears. So in my building, what I saw as an individual organizer was that it was proper in terms of keeping these kind of structures affordable to the broader community and to the future generations. Because typically what happens in co-ops is that people set them up to make money. The concept of cooperative is an old idea, that goes back to the anarchist movement of the 1800s, and it was kind of based on mutual aid. Today, or since the 1920s, let's say, cooperative, for the most part, when we talk about housing, has become more of a joint business enterprise. I think that's been true of what we call low-income co-ops as well.
Sorry, can you put your phone on? Oh, whose phone? Whose phone is that? Oh, I'm
So-
sorry, all
Sorry.
phones,
So
or any phone.
looking at that kind of dynamic where people are looking at housing not for accommodation, but for accumulation. I looked at in the early 80s, I became aware of the Institute for Community Economics, and they were promoting the land trust model now around the country. Chuck Mathai, who was the director of that organization, was also very involved, in trying to foster these kind of developments, especially in inner cities around the country. So we were really excited. At that point, I was working with the Catholic churches, and we had initially started organizing groups to take over some vacant buildings in the neighborhood, but we were drawn to this idea of creating a more of a federated structure to bring these buildings together. We were doing what the city called, or what's been called, a homesteading type program, where we would basically break into these buildings. They were sealed up by the city, and we would start gutting them out. We didn't actually squat the buildings. That was sort of a parallel movement where some folks were just moving into these buildings and then renovating them while we lived there. That for the most part was a little too challenging, especially if you had kids or something. You can't live in this dustbin with no heat or electricity and probably no water. But it tended to attract more resourceful type people who did not have families to do those kind of developments. So we were interested in reaching out, especially since I was working with the church, to the Latinx community in the neighborhood who were faced with displacement pressures and from their landlords. So by the late 70s, there were 100 vacant buildings in that area that I called Lower Sida. I know because I counted it. It was my first job to do a land use map of the whole neighborhood. And it was pretty astonishing. Now around the city, and tell me if I'm going on too long, because there's more material to cover. Around the city, there were, I think, something on the order of 10,000 vacant buildings. The South Bronx was a much bigger version of the Lower East Side. And I recall driving around with a friend in the South Bronx, and I was amazed at the quality of the buildings that were abandoned in the Lower East Side. These were what they called old law tenements.
What years was this? This is like the 80s?
This is like the late 70s
Oh, at this point.
and into the early 80s. So it looked like someone had literally bombed the city, sections of the city, though it was maybe closer to a neutron bomb, since it wasn't actually all leveled. It was just a building. So the Bronx was, I mean, if you go along the Grand Concourse or just off the Grand Concourse, and you see these beautiful structures that were just empty, and lots of commercial spaces.
How did that happen? How did they
Well,
like-
especially, I think a lot of these areas were historically, rented to low-income people. So after the Arab-Israeli War in 1973, I think the Saudis and the oil companies kind of conspired to jack up the oil prices as a way to, well, the Saudis, as a way to punish the West for siding with Israel. But it wasn't that clear, because the oil companies in the US also jumped on board, and they all just jacked up their prices based on some idea that there was an oil shortage. So the landlords, I mean, and you can look more into that history. I'm sure there are details that I'm missing. But with that dramatic increase in prices, landlords stopped making a profit on their buildings. Even renting to poor people, they would make a profit. So they began like abandoning over time, and even burning down these buildings in droves. I mean,
For insurance purposes?
Yes.
Oh,
so when I was growing up in the 60s in Washington Heights, I lived in a Mitchell Llama co-op, which is another interesting social housing model. And we would look out at the Bronx, and every other night we'd see a fire. So I literally watched the Bronx burn down. That was one of my things that inspired me to get involved in trying to see what we could do to reverse that. So when I came into the neighborhood, it just looked like the Wild West. The streets were torn up, just mass, large numbers of vacant buildings, and that became our geopolitical space to create a new community that we tried to look at how we were doing communities in the past, and looking at how we could do it better. So the homesteading model was one way to involve the community. Typically, it meant people doing what they called sweat equity on buildings, coming in on the weekends, helping to gut them out, clean them up. In some cases, people had skills, so they could do some electrical or plumbing. But by and large, people didn't have these skills. So our aim was to try to fund these kind of efforts and have the homesteaders who were physically able do some work on weekends, but then bring in contractors with city, state, federal loans, grants, as well as grants from foundations. Religious communities played a big role in supporting this movement. So that was kind of homesteading in the conventional sense. But we took that a step further. What we did is we said, if we're going to build a housing movement in the community, we can't just expect people who are physically able to do, work, to be involved in this and then consider that really a community project. So we had to be very intentional about bringing in folks who might be disabled, might be older, senior citizens, and as well as homeless. So we had to structure the buildings that we organized with a mix of people some who were physically able, and some who were not.
And is that where the landmark kind of grew from, is Homestead, or?
No, we we were kind of the exception to this model. You know, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board promoted this conventional model around the city. We promoted this alternative model in the Lower East Side in East Harlem, where I've also worked. And we began to look at social housing models as well to address the issue of sustainability. Again, the larger organization doing this was not interested in that, in doing so, in sustainability. You know, they gave it lip service, but in reality, you have to also be very intentional if you're going to preserve the affordability of these buildings and apartments for future generations. So we identified, or I guess I could say there were 3 principles that we organized around at that time. And that was that the buildings had to be empowering, that we weren't going to create a kind of a landlord-tenant relationship, but that we would create cooperatives where everyone had an equal voice in the governance of these buildings. Secondly, the buildings would be socially integrated, drawing on what I said earlier about being inclusive of people who couldn't necessarily do physical labor, or, you know, maybe they could participate in other ways, for example, or maybe they just couldn't participate. Homeless families, homeless individuals, they would come into the project later. And you could not expect someone who's homeless, living in shelter, to come every weekend. And it's just too much, too many issues. And you know, and of course, you had people disabled, even people in wheelchairs, who were homesteaders. You know, who could, maybe they could take minutes or something. Maybe they couldn't.
Right.
But the point was
Right.
if you're going to build a community movement, you have to include the whole community. So that's where we stood apart from this conventional notion of homesteading. So the third principle was that the buildings be sustainable, that we had to address this very sticky issue of equity, especially when you're doing cooperatives, and that we had to try to create a limited equity concept where whatever monies you would get when you moved out would be very limited. That's an especially complicated subject, which I can go into more, because this is from 35 years ago. I'll just pass this around. So I had written some pieces on this, and I've written the church's housing platform, which is a longer piece. This is kind of a shorter piece that summarizes what we were up to. And today, it's taken about 30 years for this model to really gain attention around the city, so that in the last few years, the city has actually been funding the development of community land trusts, not with billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, but with a few million.
For each individual project or for?
Citywide.
Oh, citywide.
It might be a few million. So each individual project will
Get a
get
certain.
a few $100,000 to do the planning and all that kind of stuff. So are you all familiar with the structure of a community land trust? Or should I say something about the structure of the community land trust?
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't get to hear you. What did you say?
Are you familiar with the definition of a community land trust?
No,
Trust or
we'd
the
love to hear
structure?
it.
So a community land trust is typically a not-for-profit organization organized in the interests of lower income people to maintain the affordability of land and housing into the future. That's a very broad definition, and I'll break it down a little more. So typically, a land trust would own the underlying land in which the building is constructed. So the building itself could be owned by a not-for-profit organization, a cooperative, mutual housing association, community organization, or anything like that. And the land underlying it would be owned by a community land trust. The board of the community land trust would consist of 1/3, this is the typical definition of the residents from the housing on that land. 1/3 from community residents who don't live, non-residents, and 1/3 of at-large members who might be people with special expertise or professionals or others that
But would live in the same community or
not
not?
necessarily, no.
So why would you add that third element?
To bring in the kind of expertise that you might want to draw on.
Right. Also like a board.
Yes,
Yeah. okay.
trustees, that's right.
Right.
So that's the typical structure. And what's unusual about, your building is, if you have one building, it's, you could do a community land trust with one building. You could set up a board that owns the land, and then your other board or organization that owns the building. It might be a lot of work for just one building. Typically, what you're aiming for is to bring many parcels together through the land trust. So in the case of this Rain Community Land Trust, we had 9 buildings that became part, that in effect contributed their land to the organization of the land trust, and then each building was organized cooperatively. Yeah.
So for example, the community garden that's on both sides, could that potentially be part of the trust
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
Even if the city owns part of it and maybe like,
Not if the city owns it. If the city deeds over the land to the
So-
land trust, there's no reason why you can't have a community garden or a business or a daycare center or food co-op on this land trust. In
Got it.
fact, you probably need to do something like that. And this is one of the more things I've been hammering on more recently to sustain the people's interest in the land trust.
Mhm.
So there's a couple of problems that I've seen, over the years. I haven't actually been that directly involved with land trusts until recently. I mean, since around 1992, when I stopped working with the Rain Community Land Trust, which actually is not active right now. I mean, it exists on paper. The buildings are part of it, but there were certain things that I would obviously do differently to make it a more sustainable organization. And so I hadn't really been too focused on land trusts for about 30 years. And then around 2016 or so, it reemerged as a model of interest under, this drive towards really rethinking social housing. Social housing, just for definition purposes, could be any housing that serves lower income people, and that's generally not for profit. So a social housing model, when I use that phrase, could also mean public housing. It could mean a mutual housing association, which is an organization where the tenants actually control the housing, but it's not a cooperative structure. There's no equity, there's no shares. The mutual housing association, it could be a cooperative, a limited equity cooperative, or it could be housing that's owned by a not-for-profit, and the tenants are renters. So all that comes under this wide definition of social housing model. But typically when people talk about social housing models, they're talking about the more innovative concepts like community land trust and mutual housing associations these days. But we really had to look at this issue of equity, because it's the biggest barrier to having a vision for actually a new future. It's very difficult to restrict people in terms of resale prices, and you're a broker. Once that horse is out of the barn, if you say to people, well, we want you to maintain this into the future as affordable to low and moderate income people, and you work it out amongst yourselves, the folks will not really work it out. They will, and this is what happens a lot with these co-ops, these low income co-ops and called Housing Development Fund Corporations. Anybody familiar with these HDFCs?
Several in Crown Heights.
They've been gentrified throughout the city. When we raised these issues in the 1980s, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board was not interested. Their argument, actually, I was writing something on this recently, co-ops and community land trusts. Their argument was, why should low-income people be treated differently than middle-income people and upper-income people who own housing? It's a source of wealth for these families, and why would you take that away from them? So that doesn't sound unreasonable. You know, we live in America.
So they could sell it, they could sell their,
Yeah, they could sell their share just like any other middle-income, you know, this is
become a,
a capitalist society or a messed up society. Not really. Totally capitalist as much as we're really messed up.
It's
And-
called it's messed up. That's good.
really. So my argument was, well, okay, two points. One is these buildings are getting grants and low interest, below market rate loans from the government. And so, and they're offered as a result, lower rents, lower maintenance charges that make it, in effect, their housing security that they're offered for the lifetime of their residence in that apartment. And I think that has to be considered. And secondly, do we want to create the same conditions 20 years from now that we're facing today? In other words, where there's a housing shortage and low-income people cannot find apartments they can afford. Are we here to create a real movement, or are we here just to be a one-shot deal? You know, one generation, that's it, like everything else.
Right, and that's where sustainability comes in, right?
Yeah, that's where sustainability comes in. So I also argued that we all come into this world on the shoulders of, you know, our parents, society. We're not asked to repay our parents' costs, you know, of our upbringing. You can use any of these kind of, you know, analogies, which I kind of like.
No, it's true.
And so why are we asking people who happen to be looking for housing to shoulder the burden of your equity when you leave? They had nothing to do with the fact that, you know, the market now says your $10,000 unit is worth $500,000. That wasn't their doing.
Wow.
That's the doing a systemic issue development within capitalism and the commodification of housing and, you know, other kinds of basic human needs. So the community land trust model struggled with this issue and came up with some, you know, nice language. People have written books like this one, right? People I respect have written books about, you know, how the land trust will mediate between these kinds of issues, your right to a return on your investment and a right to the community's need for long-term affordability. So they speak to these tensions within this kind of structure in terms of, well, let's go through the principles just really quickly. Empowerment, you know, there's a tension between self-governance and community input on decision making. You say, oh, we're going to empower people to, you know, make their own decisions and communities to make their own decisions. Okay, that's great, but on the other side of that equation is the non-residents who live in that community, or a larger community that also are impacted by the decisions you make. So we always see that kind of struggle, right? Where if you hate something the city is doing, which I often do, we're screaming for, you know, the right, you know, they're violating our rights as community members to decide what's best for our own
So you have to
community.
monitor kind of what
Or-
you're possibly doing there.
Yeah, so I might use that argument. Then if you're, say you're against, if you're a right to life person, you'll say in our community, we believe women should not have the right to an abortion. That's what we believe. It's our community. You have no right to tell us what to do. And we say, no, that's wrong. Women, I don't care what community you're in, women have a right to choose, or, you know, wherever you live. So you see there's a tension, right, between how we use these arguments. Sometimes we use them to assert our own power within the community. Other times we use them to assert a broader accountability to maybe a higher set of ideals.
Right. So in the case of, like, for example, the property that Nest for Environmentalists, if there's principles, right, of everyone living there per se have an idea of an environmental movement or whatnot, even if they have that space in the community, let's say some of the community gardeners also have that same concept, and they start kind of like a way of living within that space, that doesn't mean that if anything else kind of comes in and they're, for example, not composting, that community then will fight kind of the larger city for these kind of rights, or
Well, the city might say, we want to take away your garden and build more housing, right? And then you say, oh, our community needs gardens. We have the right to garden, we need to eat. And then other people in the community or beyond the community saying, well, we think housing is more important than you're growing some flowers or vegetables on a few plots in your garden, okay? So who's right? Well, you know, you have to look into that issue and draw some conclusions about, you know, which argument is actually more persuasive. And it's not a simple kind of solution to a lot of these questions. I just raise that to show that there's a tension. So to move on, when we talk about the principle of social integration, we also have a tension. People believe when they have an apartment, if they own the share or own the apartment, that they have the right to pass this apartment on to their children or their, you know, next of kin, and that's their legacy. Okay, everyone goes here. That's only fair. On the other hand, if you're trying to sustain or maintain a socially integrated building, how do you bring in other people if it just becomes your family or your set of families that chooses who comes in to move into that? Now, I'm not saying that's something, it's a tension that you have to struggle with. The third principle, which I called sustainability, was around the really sticky question of equity. You know, people are saying, well, I worked so hard for this building, I put all my sweat in, and now you're telling me you can't make any money. You know, and it's the American way, right, to get rewarded for your hard work. On the other hand, it also excludes a lot of people who are saddled with, as I said earlier, this responsibility to pay you for what you believe your equity is in that property. So the land trust movement, or the writers early on tried to say, well, the land trust can mediate that issue by helping come up with resale policies for homeowners and co-ops, later on co-ops. And in my view, what that did, this is controversial, has been to really kind of protect, sort of like FDR, he's been critiqued as really saving capitalism, right? So the land trust model, in a way, has served to save capitalism within the housing, within the housing movement, by saying, yeah, it's okay to do co-ops. We're gonna control the resales if you join our land trust, so you can feel good about it. So what have we seen? You know, so actually, let me back up. Early on, I proposed that one solution to this dichotomy between the person selling and the person buying is that we treat equity as an insurance problem, in the same way that we insure people against sickness, and loss, due to acts of God and whatnot. We can also insure buildings when people move out, so that we accumulate a pool of funds that could pay off the equity of a departing member, rather than saddle a person who's trying to move in, who's low income, with the equity, and obviously they could not afford it. So it's an interesting concept. Obviously, if the equity is $1 million, we're not going to have a pool large enough to cover that. The theory in insurance is that the interest from your assets of the insurance companies covers their outlay on insurance claims, not their actual principles. They have hundreds of millions of dollars that generate enough interest to cover outlays when they have to pay out insurance. So we apply the same principle to this question of equity. Anyway, it's an interesting concept. It could be explored more, but it clearly requires resale values to be rather low. So having said that, we fast forward 30 years and we look at what's gone down. And as I said, we see this massive gentrification in these HDFCs. And we also see land trusts that where they have cooperative buildings, those buildings are really, I think, not available to the lowest income members of communities. And I just wrote a piece on that, saying that land trusts and co-ops don't necessarily fit together too well. And I will favor what they call these no equity kinds of co-ops, which is effectively, I guess, a mutual housing association. Now, a lot of people won't like that critique of the land trust movement, especially when you talk about the city where you have these multifamily buildings. It won't be a popular concept, but it's something that we can talk about more. But I'll just stop there on that issue, and I want to address one other problematic feature of land trusts. And I'm not saying don't do the land trust for your house, your building. I'm just saying that this is where 30, 40 years of kind of doing this and also looking back on it have left me. Okay. So the second problem with developing, as I see it, a community land trust, particularly in a multifamily setting, is that you're basically dealing with two organizations. You're dealing with the organization that's maintaining the building, and you're dealing with the organization that's maintaining the land. When you're looking at the more traditional kinds of land trusts, where they had single-family homes, there was only one organization. That was the community land trust. So when you have two organizations, it means there's going to be a lot of organizational maintenance involved in this kind of structure. Yeah. So what can happen is that the land trust, which serves essentially in the conventional sense as an oversight body, in some ways as a policing body, kind of people lose interest in being part, being active in the land trust, because they might be active in their own building. And now you've got a second organization that you've got to sustain, have meetings and all that good stuff. So how do you deal with that? How do you make the land trust something that people want to, that people will defend and want to be involved in? As I said, they've already got their own building. This is a multi-tenant situation. So you've got to include programs, in my view, and activities that will really stimulate people's interest. So the land trust, if it's going to change the community, has to create a radical transformation of the community. Otherwise, in my view, you're just layering a second organization on top of your existing organization. Okay, and the existing organization might do a lot of the features that the land trust already does, like, you know, controlling equity or, you know, making sure people have heat and hot water and all that stuff. And the land trust comes along and says, well, we just want to make sure you're not going to sell your building to a developer. That's, again, I don't think that's enough to make it worth it to go through the effort to create a land trust. But if you look at it, a land trust as a new transformation of community, a radical transformation of community, you can come up with some really cool stuff, right? The land trust could be a way to bring in an alternative energy concept. You know, why not a land trust for our energy production? So what would that look like, as an example? Well, all these buildings have rooftops, and we can install, for example, solar panels on these roofs, but we're not going to do it in the traditional way where each building you know, has its own solar array installed and maintained. We're going to aggregate the power of all the solar installations over all the buildings in the land trust and beyond. We're going to try and organize the community, everyone with a roof.
I'm saying, I'm getting a little confused again about what we're looking at as a prototype for land trust and what the reality is for Greg's building, and whether it's a single unit, obviously the people or the apartments or use of it inside, or there's multiple dwellings and pieces. But are we talking about multiple buildings, or are we talking about one unit?
Typically, a land trust is multiple buildings.
So in this case, Greg, what are we talking about? A single building?
Well, there's existing now in East New York land trust. Now, whether or not geographically they find it's exclusively East New York, or whether we could work with other landlords in Crown Heights and create a land trust.
Is there anything close to you that you consider to be usable? I mean, or similar, or where you have a synergy with that?
Well, the church, right? I mean, the church could potentially be part of the land
Well, the
trust.
thing I'm excited about is just mutual aid. There's this group called Crown Heights Mutual Aid.
Yeah, it's great to have all this information, but the situation is really, how does it pertain to your building?
Well, here's the situation as I see it. Not to divert from,
No, but I think it's good. I'm just gonna
but
show both of
what's
you. here.
happening is, I think you should look at it as a phased approach. I think in the immediate 5-year foreseeable future, the main thing is to populate this building and make it financially viable. So that we would basically, my vision right now, we have 8 bedrooms. We could have 8 people living there. Try to make it as socially and age diverse as possible. And but think
The
in
land
terms of,
trust is to protect the building. from-
right, so the land trust would not happen in the immediate near term. It would be like as a what I was just speaking with an investor yesterday. The guy was very interested in doing philanthropic stuff. He also has a lot of money. It's like, what if we set this building up as just an LLC, which is just a form of ownership, typical a joint venture or whatever. And then in a 5-year time frame, we have this model land trust that's more encompassing, as Howard suggesting. We have gardens, obviously. If we could get the city to donate these gardens to land trust, wow, that'd be cool, right?
Yes.
We have a lot of rooftops around. What if we were able to set up some solar panels and make that part of some cooperative thing?
Right.
We have the Crown Heights Mutual Aid Association, which has got, I think, over 3,000 members. We're very active during the pandemic. A bunch of younger people with money providing aid to people with no money in terms of food, you know. They're looking for a mission right now. They're right going through a whole re-envisioning
That
process.
was the down under like others.
Right, so we have Crown Heights Mutual Aid. It's like, we're like, gee, the pandemic's over. People are getting back to work. food crisis is not necessarily here, but we really still have a lot of problems in our community. What kind of mission could come out of our existence that might be exciting and transformative? So we're like, well, there is a land trust thing. So if you're 3,000 to 4,000 people, maybe you have some sympathetic landlords who might be willing or interested in being part of a land trust. You know, so like in a 5-year time frame, we can assemble, like you were saying, 10, 15, 20 buildings in Crown Heights.
That gives us enough time for sure.
Yeah. So I guess our building built, we get it financially solid, we get people in there paying rents, the money's paid off the mortgage, it's all good. It's a stable, legal entity. We aggregate that with a dozen other buildings in the area, Crown Heights Mutual Aid and other entities are being pulled together. And in a 5-year time frame, we create the Crown Heights.
Essentially, and you
Land
have to start
trust.
planning
Does that
now.
make sense
It's a
to
big
you?
project.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I was kind of saying earlier. You could, you're only one building right now. You could still do the land trust. But it would be a visionary kind of proposition. So you would be looking at the point where you could, you know, do this, bring in other parcels, which is how that would happen. And then you could do the kind of transformative, exciting stuff as part of the land trust. The land trust has to generate ideas and hopefully money to do this kind of program. You know? So with the one thing we talked about in the East Village, Lower East Side, is this what they call clean energy co-op, to aggregate the power on these different rooftops from different solar installations, so that we're in a better negotiating position with Con Edison. Be a parallel energy producer for clean energy, electricity in the city, but bigger way that's been done. The other thing, you know, that the co-op, that the land trust could do, it could sponsor or set up a food co-op. Right?
Yeah, there's
In one of
actually
the
been one
storefronts.
forming in Crown Heights, and
Okay.
actually Bed-Stuy for like 5 or 6 years.
well,
That's
Bed Stuy, but if
yeah.
you do it in Crown Heights,
Yeah.
I mean, that, there's still a lot of development, slowly building in that little, like, that little area right on Atlantic, right, where the Dollar Tree is. I mean, there's just so
That's
much
a
space.
commercial area.
Right,
Well,
there's
home
plenty of
co-op.
space.
We have the community center that I run has a community support agriculture project. So we work with
CSA.
local CSA farmers. That could be incorporated into the activities of the land trust. Then people start to see, wow, there are real activities here, there are real things to do. We want to be part of that. You know, maybe some homeowner or other owner might be willing to put their land into that trust. I'd be interested to hear how you do
Yeah,
that.
I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time. It's like
Right, well, it's
8:05,
8 o'clock now, but no,
and we have food, and we also have
Sure.
Renato eagerly waiting to talk about another whole.
well, I
visionary
think this
thing.
is a great transition though, because what you're doing essentially, and Renato, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're now dreaming, right? So like
Yes.
we're in the dream phase at this point.
Yes.
And so Renato is, and I think he can mainly talk about this. Would you like him to talk now and just kind of
Well, I think
briefly?
maybe a good time to
or
take a break.
Do you want to
and
take a
try to,
break?
You know, be mindful of Renato's patience, and because
Yeah,
he
for
was
sure.
supposed to be the other half. And
Yeah, no, for
And then
sure. But I
maybe
think
next-
it is
maybe
a
the
great
next meeting, I
transition
don't know.
to
Yeah.
what the second part of this is which
Is
is,
a dream.
it's called
Vision.
dragon dreaming, but it's essentially,
That's right.
yeah, envisioning
Right.
something that
That's right.
obviously isn't going to be figured out in one day, but
No.
just getting folks involved in the
That's right.
dragon dreaming process.
That's
So,
right.
and there is
Renato,
guidelines
are
to it.
you there? Can you speak?
Yes, I'm here.
Can
Okay,
you-
so
Can you give us a little bit of a brief of dragon dreaming before we go
like,
into
yeah,
kind of food?
2-minute segue, and then we're gonna bounce on the food, all right?
All right. So it's a methodology that draws on living systems and some Aboriginal knowledge from Australia, and also, well, a whole bunch of reference. You know, the guy that created this methodology, his name is John Croft. He's Australian, and what he did is that he brought like the best of all methodologies, creating this method for designing projects, but also executing it in a way that is really in a different paradigm. You know, so instead of having, you know, the usual structures of power and of separation of people, you know, some people plan it, some people do it, nobody celebrates it. He put it together with a method for creating these projects in a very fun and human way, you know, working on the win-win. And so basically that's the idea of dragon dreaming. And this has been, you know, there are practitioners around the world, especially in the last, I would say, 15 years. It has been growing quite well, and it's really something. You know, I applied it for some of my projects, and it's great. So I think it might be a very good method for, let's say, designing a new perspectives for Greg's project in a more collective way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're gonna take a little break now and get some food, and we'd
So
love
we
to
say,
hear.
what, 15 minutes, Renato? Is that good?
Yeah, whatever you guys like.
Clock, and you just look at it's 8:02, so like 8:15.
Yeah.
Renato, and do a deeper dive. Thanks a lot, guys. Your patience, Renato, and waiting for us. But you know how these things are.
Some
Time is a relative term. It's
You wanna turn on the light there, Matt? Can you turn on the light? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
St. Nicholas Avenue and
I think it's
Gail.
Yeah, that's what Matt said. There's actually another one.
Harold, do you want me to get you a plate? I can just start making that.
You know Mitch Cohen?
Grew up in Stuyvesant, so I slept walk to school. Actually, my son went there.
Tonight, we have tomorrow night at 7.
Son. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on
Briefing.
my friends. Actually,
Yeah.
In response to COP26, which I think ends Sunday.
I'll make you one.
So they're
You
gonna
don't
say,
have to like.
next steps. Because the belief is
so I
that
lived in Stuyvesant.
it's not going to do enough, the government's. So,
They're already not doing that.
yeah.
I mean,
And,
in this build back,
We're doing that,
you know,
yeah.
already leaving out.
I call it,
Maybe I should send it to, the SWAT, the Brooklyn SWAT.
which is essentially new culture.
Is it on
Just-
Zoom?
My only concern with this building is that
Yeah.
Are they, any?
it sounds like the gateway around during the meetings.
Oh, yeah, I just went back, I found a.
Oh, you guys are sorry.
Oh, you can.
Yeah, they're sitting down, so
Oh, just put it in the, what do we eat it
in the plates like last time.
in? Where are the plates?
There, remember last time you had those little plates?
Well, the-
Here you go.
Okay. There's only like.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, you only need one.
the budget should be.
Yeah, I know. And that's for everything else.
Yeah, so you have
The
3.
question is that, you know, because I had to tell me financial rewards, whatever. just
You didn't get,
traditional.
you didn't get the sham.
um, establishment. I gotta get going, sorry. Yeah, I did.
Absolutely, drag is what he would do.
Yes, that's what I'm
Forward.
It's always better to start
You're
off
in the second part.
with a land trust and dive back into it
It's very complicated.
later on.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, thank you.
not sure if that.
But what it's, people lose interest.
Your napkin.
Like we had our flagship building,
Yeah.
this is senior, one of the brightest building on Avenue C.
Creek Sunrise, subway's still running.
They didn't get it for technical reasons. It was the first building to close on whatever. They didn't get into the event. And then it never ended up never getting.
How is it?
This
This is great information. Actually, I'm gonna stop recording for now.
I wanted to get.
It has, maybe it's stopped on its own. How do you, I think it's stopped on its own. The recording.
Nobody was talking.
Yeah, I think the recording stopped on its own because I don't see it saying recording anymore. Oh, it does. Okay. And take it away there. Go ahead, Renato, whenever you're ready.
All right, okay. So I will present a little bit, but just a little bit about Dragon Dreaming. This is the website here, dragondreaming.org. So you can download like a whole bunch of materials and fact sheets and videos and stuff like this. But before, I want to tell you why I told Greg that maybe it's a good idea to have a Dragon Dreaming session and use it in his project, you know, because the thing about Dragon Dreaming, it's really good about getting a dream that starts with one person and destroy this dream and make it collective. So the dream has to die, you know, in order to be reborn as a dream for the community, for the team that is working alongside it. And so what you do is you start by creating a dream team, you know, so the initial dreamer invites people that he thinks, you know, could or contribute to the dream, or that he wants to work together with these people. And I guess these are you, right? All you guys were invited by Greg, and you heard from him about his dream. And he is at that stage right now that he can't do it alone. There are too many challenges. It's beyond him to make this dream come true. You know, so he needs help. You know, more people and also ideas, because as we bring new possibilities, you know, like land trust, or you know, get investors, or you know, make this into a co-living with the people that are living there, helping to finish building the space and solving the matters with the bank and all of this. I mean, any of these possibilities, they don't depend only on him. You know, it depends on other people coming together and joining. And in order for this to happen, you need to have a design and to have a plan that works for everybody that's coming together, right? It needs to be win-win, you know. And that's something really beautiful about Dragon Dreaming, because it really, in a very simple way, and it's also very fast, you can get a group of people, integrate them, and access the collective intelligence. You know, and there are things that we know. There are things that we know that we we don't know. For example, I know I don't know how to play guitar. That's within my awareness of things that I don't know. But there are also these things that we don't even know that we don't know. And this is the magical space that we want to come for solving the challenges in the project right now, because there are no easy solutions. So we have to access this place of the creativity and where we can find the ahas and really find a way that can give birth to something wonderful and sustainable, and that's good for everybody, right? So Dragon Dreaming, it's based on 3 principles. For a Dragon Dreaming project, for a project to be a Dragon Dreaming project, you need to have personal growth. So this commitment to our own healing and empowerment, during any project that we are working together. We are faced with our dragons, right? With our fears and our mistrusts, our traumas, especially when we're dealing with things that deal with money. There's a lot of deep wounds that we as a humanity have accumulated, and it hurts, so you have to expect that during the project, you'll be faced with these pains and with these dragons, and you finish the project a better person. Like if all goes well, you're able to learn about it and come in the other side transformed. It's not just about transforming the environment, transforming the planet or Brooklyn, but also to transform ourselves, right? The second principle is community building, so strengthening the communities of which we are part. And the third principles is service to the earth. And so I see all of these 3 elements very ingrained on the Nest for Environmentalists project. I think it's a great fit for being a Dragon Dreaming project, for using the methodology for it. So just about the basis of Dragon Dreaming, it's very based on living systems, Gregor Bateson, and a whole bunch of people studying and working with cybernetics, which is about embracing the complexity of the reality, right? So instead of being everything very like you plan it and then it's very linearly built to achieve one aim, it's more adaptable, like a living organism. You're in constant relation with the environment and getting the feedbacks, and according to what you receive from this feedback, you are able to change the project and then end up with something that actually makes sense, and not something that we think about and then we try as hard as we can to make it real, but like in a very aggressive power over way. Instead, Dragon Dreaming uses like a more power with approach, right? You're not trying to impose anything. You're trying to like a dance, communicate, and do something that flows well with gentleness among the team members and among the environment. Also, the thing about the Aboriginal knowledge, the Aboriginal from Australia, they're probably the oldest culture in the world. They have been there for 60,000 years, and their in Australia, it's a very unforgiving environment. It's very dry, it's desert-like, and you don't have much room for mistakes, right? So the Aboriginal, they had to develop a culture that was win-win, or better yet, win-win-win. You know, you win, I win, and the planet wins. Because if they depleted too much the environment, then they would waste the land, and that means they would also die, you know, kind of what we're doing in a planetary level. But, you know, for over 60 years in the continent there. And also about the relationship with the other, you know, if they played win-lose games and they were not cooperating, that would mean that the other one would die probably, you know, because of such harsh conditions. So they had developed this culture that is it have a cosmovision about them being first the steward of the land, but also having this very special relationship with the environment, with the land, and also with each other. You know, there's less ego, less of this notion of separation between me and you, and it's much more collective culture. The thing about dreaming in the Aboriginal culture is that, you know, there is this thing called dreamland, which is another plane where you come from and you return after, that everything is fused, you know, and there is no past, present, and future. All the time, they call it the ever when. And when somebody has an idea, it's not that that person had an idea. It's like you access this idea from this place, and you're just channeling or, you know, communicating this idea to the rest of the group. You know, so all these concepts of ego and this is my idea, and I will be defending it against your idea. It doesn't exist on the Aboriginal culture as we know it here in the Western culture. And Dragon Dreaming tries to, through its design, to make in a way that the team also will be working based on this win-win approach and based on this subjective, creative, fun way of creating a project, right? I want to show you here the basic steps of Dragon Dreaming, which is this dance between the individual and the environment. You know, like you start with the dream of the individual, you tell this dream to the team, start bringing it to the environment, start testing it, and then it's like a membrane, you know, that the environment is changing the individual is changing the environment. And in the beginning, the individual has to do a lot of work. But as you go through the project, you have the environment, you know, this could be talked about the community, for example, doing the heavy lifting, you know, like people really coming together and unburdening the individual and the initial team members, right? And then also same thing happens in this vertical axis. You have the theory, and we start, you know, working and testing, and then you change your theory, your ideas according to what you experience. You know, this is actually based on in the theory of Paulo Freire, which is a Brazilian educator, and also is one of the bases for Dragon Dreaming. Paulo Freire, he has this great concept for education, which is the pedagogy of the question. Says that instead of focusing on the answers, which is what we usually do, right? This answer and this answer is the right one. No, you focus on the question, because the question opens the possibility, So you start always with generative questions to get to this space of creativity and of ahas. And in Dragon Dreaming, the 4 stages, they are, they go counterclockwise here. Start with dreaming, and then planning, doing, and celebrating. It's funny because when I worked with management consulting, we also had a method that was called the PDCA. It was four steps like Dragon Dreaming, but it's planning, doing, checking, and acting, and somehow this thing about dreaming and celebrating, it's forgotten on usual management and project design methods, right? We go straight to plan, and then do, and we forget about dreaming and celebrating. So Dragon Dreaming says that you should be using 25% of your time and resources for each one of these. 25% of resources into dreaming, to really get into this what's important, what's the dream before you even start planning, and also 25% after in celebrating, because that's here where you get the transformation of the individual, right? But also the evaluation, and the learning from the project. So Dragon Dreaming, you start a project, you're doing this cycle here, and you can finish and then start again, and it's like a spiral. You get bigger, expanding all the time, and also inside yourself, right, with the self transformation, but always following this pattern here: dreaming, planning, doing, and celebrating. So coming back to the stage of the nest for environmentalists, I think right now we are here in this first stage here, awareness, right? We're learning about what it is, what's the situation, what's Greg's dream, and about each other, right? We're meeting each other. We're gathering already information about land trust and how this could be a way for the project, right? So that's this first stage. And what I told Greg is that, Greg, first you should form your dream team, see who would be interested in going through this journey with you. Invite people that you trust, invite people that you would like to be in a journey together with you, invite people that have talents and resources and experiences that you don't have, so that you can complement yourself, right? And then I would be happy to help, facilitate this dreaming together, and possibly, if we find a dream that we want to work together, then doing the whole cycle here, right? In the dreaming, they would start with what we call dream circle. It's where Greg gets to pitch his initial dream, and then everybody can also present what would need to happen or to be there, so that this is the best, this project is the best way for you to spend your time. And remember that time is life, right? So it's if you're going to a project, it's better worth it. What does it take for this to be worth to you? And it's surprising what we get in these sessions, of and how just by dreaming together we can come closer to materializing something that is really creative. It's different than anything that we could have dreamed by ourselves, but also motivates all the group to be together for this whole and long journey here, right? So this is like the first step. We were actually thinking, how is this project going to be? Is that going to be converted in land trust, that a co-housing, is that a place for people to come and to learn, or to, kind of community center for environmentalists? What's that about, right? Consider alternatives, then sometimes you don't cross this threshold, and then you have to come back here to the beginning of dreaming again. This is kind of like a fractal, and it's based on the living systems anymore. So this here, dreaming, it's the stimulus, and if the stimulus is strong enough, it crosses the threshold, which is the planning, right? It's to validate this into reality. I mean, we're still on the theory. We're still only, with things that are in your head, but we're starting here to design strategies to see how much it would cost, and see where we're gonna get the money, and so this planning process, it's the threshold between the stimulus and the action, right? So you have a stimulus, which is, the dream or something that you really want to make real. You have the threshold, then you go to the action. The action is the actual implementation. And also, any of these, you finish here in the testing, prototyping, it didn't work well, you don't cross into doing, you come back to planning more, to consider alternatives. So you come back to this part, or you cross here and you start doing, and then you monitor progress. Sometimes you don't like what you see, and then you have to start again with the implementation again, doing something a little bit different. And then finally, you cross here into celebrating. Remember, I said this is a fractal, so you're celebrating all along the way, but you cross here like to really, after the project's done, to see what are the new skills that you acquired, what are the results, things that are really changing. And then this is the beginning of new dream, so you then can start higher iterations of the project, starting again this cycle, with a stronger team, with more bonding, with people that have acquired new skills and are better. Yeah, so that's basically what I had to say. I didn't prepare anything more in depth than that. I think I would like to hear what you guys talked about, and if there is any questions or comments.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my question is, could the doing a list of tasks that need to be completed, however, it's not doing where it's so huge that you wouldn't go back to dreaming again, right? After celebrating those small tasks. Like, for example, we did the website, right? Or Greg did the website. That's a
Yeah.
different section, right? To getting this meeting going,
Yes.
small task. We're here, we're celebrating in real time because a lot of the elements were brought together. It doesn't have, the dragon dreaming doesn't have to be the big project. It could be broken into smaller pieces. That's my question.
Yes. Yes, it can, it's like a fractal. So you can have a bigger project, and then this project requires, one of the tasks of the project is to do a website. Well, doing a website, creating a website, it's a project on itself, So this can be taken as you can do the dreaming of the website, and then the planning of the website, and then so they in a way they are nested within each other, right? Especially in a project like this, that's like a big project, there's a place, and a lot of money at stake, and so you can have like the main project and idea, and then you break out on more digestible mini projects, so that it's not too overwhelming, right? But they need to be connected, I think, in this case.
Any other questions?
Frederick and Howard.
I think it's really good introduction, Renato. I mean, we could probably send the website out. I mean, the link that you just went to, because the ebook is downloadable through the website, or no?
Yes, you can download the ebook, and also I can select some videos that are like 5 minutes and explains well.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you working on,
You have to face over here. The mic is right here.
Oh.
The laptop.
are you working on, like a community right now besides, I mean, yeah, what are you working on now in terms of using this model?
Oh, me? Okay. So I said that I started a nonprofit in Brazil. We use Dragon Dreaming in this nonprofit in everything we do. We have we run, right? We facilitate a community fund for one town that was a place of a disaster in Brazil. There was a iron ore dam that collapsed, and it was horrible tragedy that killed like more than 200 people. And we created this community fund for recovery of the community, with local projects. So this is run with Dragon Dreaming. The organization is run with Dragon Dreaming. In Dragon Dreaming, there is one concept that is called empty-centered organization, which are like decentralized organizations that you operating with power with, instead of these hierarchical power over traditional structure, right? So we also apply this to my organization in Brazil, and right now we're doing a workshop for that with the people from the nonprofit, and it will run until beginning of December. Right, so we're in the middle of another cycle in the Dragon Dreaming Wheel. And I work for a nonprofit in New York. We don't really use Dragon Dreaming. Sometimes I use one tool or another because it's also like a toolbox, right? So you can get some tools without using the whole approach. Sometimes I use it.